Welcome to Wealthy Living Conversation. I'm Lisa, your host and founder of Wealthy Living. It is here that I connect with a variety of people to have inspiring and insightful conversations to help you live a meaningful, a connected, and a well life, both personally and professionally. So today it is an absolute pleasure and privilege to be chatting with a truly inspirational and a magnificent change maker. He's the Executive Director of Australia's National Sustainable Food Systems Organisation, Sustain. Nick Rose is his name, and I'll welcome him in a minute. In this episode, we'll have the opportunity to learn from Nick's extensive knowledge and experience about food systems. We'll discuss the significance of urban agriculture, and he'll share some findings with from his latest project, the Pandemic Gardening Survey. But before I get into this, I just want to tell you a little bit about Nick's formal education and experience. So Nick holds a bachelor degree in law, a master's in community and international development, a PhD in political ecology, a Churchill Fellowship. He's the editor of Fair Food, Stories from Movement Changing the World, a co-editor of Reclaiming the Urban Commons, the Past, Present and Future of Food Growing in Australian Towns and Cities. He's also a lecturer in food studies, food systems and food movement at William Angliss Institute in Melbourne. Nick brings more than a decade of working at grassroots and institutional levels in several Australian states in food sovereignty and sustainable food systems. He believes in the power of relationships and networks to move mountains, transform societies, and change the course of history. Nick's goal is to work collaboratively with individuals and organisations who share the vision of fair, sustainable, and resilient food systems. So welcome, Nick.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks very much for this opportunity. Great to be with you and your listeners.
Oh, pleasure. It's our pleasure, and the listeners to have you here today with your vast knowledge and experience that you can share. So, you're such an incredible facilitator of change, and, I'm just wondering, why food systems? Was there a point in your life where, you came to this decision, or is there a reason that moved you to be so passionate in this area?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I guess it's really interesting for everybody who's involved in processes of social change, whoever they may be and wherever they are, what actually brought them to that point. And I guess for me, I look back and I think everything that I've done, everything that I've learned has kind of brought me to where I am today and prepared me for the work that I'm doing right now. But if there was a particular moment in time where I made a decision that really kind of put me on this course, I would say it was living in England. I was living in London for a number of years in the 1990s, and then made a decision to go and live in Guatemala in Central America and get involved in direct human rights action, a form of direct human rights action called human rights observation or human rights accompaniment. And that was with an organisation called Peace Brigades International that was set up in Spain in the mid-1980s. So my former partner and I made the decision to leave our life in England to go and live in Guatemala to learn Spanish. And then it was that experience really of living for the first time in a country of the global south, in Guatemala, understanding the history and the challenges that country had experienced over half a century, from the 1950s to the early 2000s. When we arrived there in the early 2000s, the country had just come out of nearly 40 years of internal armed conflict, which left a devastating toll of human suffering. And it was through conversations, reading, that I came to understand that so much of that had to do with food and agriculture and questions of land ownership and what kind of food was being produced and who was benefiting from the production of that food, and conversely who was not benefiting, and how that translated into infant mortality, to childhood malnutrition, hunger and poverty. All those kinds of issues came back to questions about the food system and land ownership. And I guess that was really a light bulb moment for me, that set me on the path that I'm on today. I went back and did the study that you mentioned, the master's degree through Deakin University, whilst living for several years in Guatemala, working with human rights organisations, with farmer organisations, with Indigenous peoples organisations, gaining some insight into the challenges they were facing, their realities, and their courage and resilience in the face of such profound difficulty and suffering that they'd endured, but nevertheless continuing to carry on and to strive for better quality of life, to strive for justice for their communities. Really made me realise, I guess, that somebody in my position with the privileges that I have, made me feel a sense of responsibility to dedicate my capabilities, my resources to try and make a difference in the world, to bring about the changes that I was able, and then realising that I should really probably do that in my own country, in Australia, and then making the decision to come back to Australia at the end of 2006, and since that time, really, my efforts and my research have really been all around food systems, understanding that if we think about the big challenges that we're facing, the crises that we're facing right now, so many of them come back to the way we're managing our land, the way, the kind of foods we're eating, what's going into that food, the levels of understanding about that. So much of we talk about climate change, talk about public health crises, talk about biodiversity loss, so much of this comes back to food and agriculture, and that's, I guess, the bad news. But the good news is, if we can start making changes in those systems, then we have a chance to a much better, more sustainable, fairer future across all of our society. So that's really why I've decided to concentrate my work around food and around food systems.
Yeah, brilliant. It's so amazing, isn't it, how you takes going sometimes to such poor countries who have such limited resources and somewhat poor infrastructure, and yet they're the countries that we learn the most from, and we get so inspired by, due to seeing how incredible they work together and the resilience that they have, and really working with what they've got and keeping things, really simple, and that farm to plate sort of culture that a lot of the third world countries have. And it's incredible how we live in this Western culture, which has so much more funding and education, yet it is those countries that we really seem to learn so much from.
Yes, that's right, and also, their courage and bravery, I guess, is something that's really stayed with me. I remember meeting an Indigenous rights leader, Berta Cáceres, her name was, Berta Oliva, rather, from Honduras, of the Lenca peoples in northern Honduras. And there's a little documentary on YouTube that's been made about her, called the Mother of All Rivers, La Madre de Todos los Ríos, and it's really about her, the campaign that she led her people in resisting the damming of a river that was very important to them for ancestral reasons, but also in terms of access to water and fishing and basic food security. And there was a proposal from the Honduran government and a company to put a dam on that river that would have severely impacted those communities in a very major way. And she, put her her life on the line quite literally in an environmental campaign to resist that, and paid the ultimate price very sadly. She was successful, and the mobilisations that they organised were successful in getting that decision reversed to dam the river. But then sadly, some months after that concluded, she was, masked gunmen broke into her house in the middle of the night and assassinated her. And she paid, the ultimate price for standing up for the rights of her people, and the basic source of nourishment in life, which is water. And that's, unfortunately, that's the reality that people are facing in those countries. So, whenever things seem kind of challenging and difficult for me, in my kind of little world here, I, just think back to those sacrifices of women like her and their courage and bravery, and remind myself that, I have so much to be thankful for and grateful for, and such a responsibility to use the position that I have to try to advocate for change. People like her are a real source of inspiration for me whenever I'm feeling a little bit, down or depressed, or that things are hopeless or too big, or what's the point? There's her story is one of dozens, if not hundreds, of women and men around the world who've made that sacrifice for the dignity and rights of their people. So I just need to think about that and reflect on that, and it's really kind of all the inspiration I need to keep doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, and that inspiration has a ripple effect, because you're inspired by her, but so many people are inspired by you, Nick, and the incredible work that you do, and the teams that you lead, and the people that you collaborate with to bring about such incredible change for us locally. So, that inspiration definitely has a ripple effect. I want to talk to you about another experience that you've had, and that was in 2014, where one in around 100 people in Australia are awarded a Churchill Fellowship, and you were one of those people. I'm wondering if you can just tell the people that are listening today, like, what is a Churchill Fellowship, and what research project were you involved with? And then the third thing, maybe if you can just share some of the lessons that you were able to bring back to benefit the Australian community.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. So a Churchill Fellowship is a really unique and amazing opportunity that the Churchill Foundation of Australia, which was established many years ago now, provides to, like you say, a small number of fortunate Australians, and I was one of them. I am one of them. To go and do a dedicated period of travel and study overseas. And the idea of it is that it's in a sphere of social or community life in Australia that is, has benefits for the broader community. And you, as a Churchill Fellow, your role, your responsibility with the funding that they provide is to go to a select number of countries and to have a project that you've developed to investigate, to understand, what organisations and individuals are doing in that particular area of social and community life, that they're doing, in innovative and creative and impactful ways that are perhaps not being done in that way in Australia, but that we could learn from. And your role is then to go and meet those people, to learn about what they're doing, and bring back those lessons, and hopefully to apply them in Australia, and see how we could learn from what's happening overseas, bring that back to Australia, adapt it, and apply it for the benefit of the Australian community. So that's the idea of a Churchill Fellowship. So my Churchill Fellowship was to investigate innovative models of urban agriculture, and I went to the Midwest region of the United States, to Chicago, to Milwaukee, Detroit. I then went to Toronto in Canada, and then I went to 5 provinces in Argentina in 2014. And the reason I did that is because I'd been involved in some research in Melbourne a couple of years before that, in 2012, through something called the National Climate Change Adaptation Research Facility, which was funding different pieces of research to look at how we needed to make adjustments in Australia in order to adapt to the challenges of climate change. And this particular research project was looking at the role of urban agriculture, of food growing in Australian towns and cities, and how that could help us both mitigate and adapt to the challenges of climate change and enhance levels of food security and urban resilience. And so I was part of the team that looked at Melbourne as a case study at that time. And my conclusions from that research were that there was a lot of community gardening happening in Australia, but that not a lot of it was really directed to the goal of food security in terms of actually growing food for people in vulnerable circumstances who needed access to food, and nor was a lot of it about creating livelihood opportunities, opportunities for small businesses, employment, those kinds of things. So those were the two things that I was particularly interested to go to the United States and Toronto and Argentina to learn about. And yeah, it was fantastic. I was away for a couple of months, met over 150 people, I think, in about 90 different projects and organizations. Amazing, creative, innovative, energetic people, working in challenging situations and making the most of their resources and opportunities they had to do, pretty amazing things with urban spaces to grow food and create, really fantastic, impactful urban agriculture projects. So, yeah, since that time, I've really kind of been on a bit of a mission personally and through my work with Sustain to promote the cause of urban agriculture in Australia, to promote the understanding that it has so many benefits, both in terms of food security, in expanding access to healthy and nutritious food, in terms of food literacy, working with children, with young people, in terms of understanding, how food is produced and where it comes from, and the benefits from eating, vegetables and fresh food, to the psychological benefits and mental health benefits of growing food, of spending time in nature and spending time in the garden, to the community strengthening and connecting aspects of initiatives like urban farming and community gardening, to training and employment and small business opportunities that these projects enable. So there's so many benefits. It's so multifunctional. I think in Australia, the understanding around that has been quite limited, that local government sort of thinks of it really just through the lens of community gardens only, without kind of grasping all these other dimensions and potentials. So I think we're really here just kind of starting to scratch the surface. But all of this has become, a lot more relevant and important this year in particular, in 2020, with the impact of the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns and the restrictions that we've all been under. The impacts that's had in terms of a big rise in demand for food security agencies for emergency food relief, and also the impacts of isolation. The increase in reports about people feeling anxious, people feeling worried, depressed, lonely, all these kinds of things. And the role that, spending time in the garden, having access to that space can play in, mitigating some of those impacts, as well as making people feel better about themselves and feel happier and more relaxed. I think the COVID, one of the potential silver linings of the COVID situation has been, the realization that it has created amongst large numbers of us, in terms of, what matters and what's important and what's fundamental in life, as well as at a kind of policy level at local and state government, realizing that our food system is not as, secure and stable as had been assumed, and that we need to be enabling more food growing to take place in more spaces, and that urban agriculture has a really important role to play in that. So so that was like a really important moment for me, that Churchill Fellowship, and has been very formative in the work that I've been doing, ever since, really, with Sustain.
Yeah, brilliant. And do you think, like, from the time that you finished the fellowship, and I want to talk a little bit more about what you just started to talk about then, the post-COVID opportunity that has been identified with, the last couple of months, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But do you think that that coming back and realizing all those things from your fellowship and seeing the gap that we've got here, it's been, between 2014 and 2020, 6 years. Have you seen much, like, you've come back with all of these ideas and inspiration, and you've run an extremely amazing business, Sustain, where you have a lot of, a team of people on this same mission, collaborating with other organisations on with similar goals. Have you seen much progression in the last 6 years with the government actually hearing the need?
Yeah, probably I would say definitely not at the federal government level. There hasn't been much movement there. There is starting to be a little bit of movement, just lately at the state government level in Victoria, but that's been, slow. Where I think there has been significant movement at government level has been at the local government level, local council level, and I can name a number of councils in Melbourne and Victoria that have got specific food strategies and food policies, and one of the aims of those is to encourage people to grow some of their own food. So, the city of Yarra, which is, Fitzroy and Carlton, those Collingwood, they've got an urban agriculture strategy. They've had that in place for a number of years now. The city of Moreland, which is Brunswick and Coburg, they've got a food system strategy that has been in place since 2017. They've got a food systems officer. They work closely with the Moreland Food Gardens Network, and there's a whole kind of program of work supporting people in that council area to grow more of their own food. The city of Darebin has a urban food strategy and a climate emergency strategy, and again, a strong aspect of that is about urban food gardening. They've got a Darebin Backyard Gardeners Network and a local backyard harvest festival that they've been promoting since about 2014-15, that they're continuing with now and wanting to increase. Cardinia Shire Council, a bit further out around Pakenham, Officer that way. We've been working with them since 2016. With our facilitation, they created a community food strategy in 2018. So they're, very active and involved in this area. And then there's, on the other side of Melbourne, we have Surf Coast Shire, which also has a food strategy dating to 2018-19, and the city of Greater Bendigo, which has a food system strategy, which their council endorsed just this year in 2020. And a key plank of that is supporting edible gardening and increasing edible gardening. So there's, been a significant increase in activity, and it's becoming embedded in council policies and strategies in a number of different areas in Victoria.
Brilliant. And is there a big difference in the impact that we can have if we keep it at a local council level, or do you feel that it's necessary for it to be at a state or a national government level, or is this something that can have great impact by people getting involved with their local community programs?
Yeah, look, and then alongside, I've just mentioned things happening at the local government level. Alongside that, Australians in their own communities, in their own spaces have been, many of them have been doing this for a long period of time. There's the whole permaculture movement that's been around, since the late 1970s with Bill Mollison and David Holmgren. And, a couple of years ago, David Holmgren published his Retro Suburbia book, which some of your listeners might be familiar with, which is a great kind of resource that profiles, dozens of Australians all over the country who've been turning their back gardens into mini urban farms and urban food forests and growing, significant amounts of their own food in small spaces, and sharing, the techniques about how they do that. So that's all been underway, for a long period of time. So absolutely, people, and that's one of the great things about working in this area, that, you don't have to ask anybody's permission to go and, grow some food in your own space, and connect with others who are doing the same. It's a great, there's so many different entry points into the world of food and food systems. At the same time, in terms of impact and scale and the changes that we need to make, I do think government has to be involved, and I think government at all levels needs to be involved. So it's great that local governments, and some of them, are getting seriously involved and engaged with this. However, more needs to happen, and it needs to happen not just at the local government level, it also needs to happen at the state government level and at the federal level. One of the challenges that people face, particularly, in the inner Melbourne context, if you're living in townhouses or apartments, is space. You can't grow food if you don't have space to do it. Yes, you can, grow some pots of herbs on a balcony or a little courtyard, but if you're actually wanting to, go and grow some potatoes or garlic or, whatever, you need some space. A lot of us have back gardens, but then a lot of us don't. So clearly there's a role for government and also private sector actors as well, developers. I think the development industry has a role here as well in thinking about, the land that they manage and control and who has access to that and how they can, play an important role in facilitating access to land, even if it's only for, a few years while they're kind of working out how they're going to build apartments and those kind of things. I'm one of the beneficiaries of working with a developer who's, doing exactly that. They've got land that they're going to build townhouses on, but because of the economic climate at the moment, they're not built, beginning construction for some time. So we've been part of a little community garden. We thought it was only going to be for a year, with some wicking beds, and we've been there 3 years and they still haven't commenced building. And then meanwhile, we've, harvested, probably hundreds of kilos of food in that time. And there's so many, spaces in Melbourne like that are just empty blocks of land sitting behind cyclone fences, growing weeds in concrete that could be, with a little bit of, coordination and facilitation, a bit of resourcing, could be opened up as spaces for people to grow food. So councils, developers, state government in terms of resourcing, and giving, a strategic sort of like focus and coordination, and saying that this is important and it should be, it should be something that should be encouraged and enabled, and we're going to help people to do that. And happily at this time with the state government dealing with the crisis that we're in, there are people inside the state government in different departments that are beginning to realise that and creating programs to, enable community members to do these kinds of things. So it's good to see. It's good to see some change starting to happen at that level as well.
Absolutely, and it's these things, as most people know that work in any public health area. These things don't happen overnight, and there is a quite a lengthy process, unfortunately, for it to have to see some significant change and some acceptance from different levels of people in power that allow those changes to take place. But if people are listening today and they're inspired by what you're trying to do, so, they think it's a fantastic idea, even listening to you talk about apartment buildings, I'm thinking about, wow, if it was in an apartment building, they could use even the rooftop as, and that could rooftop gardens that, sustain that building. And I don't know if that's actually a possibility, but, there's different ideas that come to mind when you speak. And I'm sure for other people listening, there might be ideas, or they might want to get involved somehow. Is this something that can be done on that individual level? Obviously, people can start their own little gardens? Or is it something that needs to be done at a bigger community and state and national level and by organisations such as yourself?
Oh no, I mean, I think people can come together. As I said, like individuals in your own space, you can start growing food yourself, and a lot of people have done that during the COVID pandemic. But I think, and we've done some survey research about this, which I might sort of touch on in a moment. People need support. If you're doing this for the first time, it seems simple, but there's a lot of kind of like traps for the novice, I guess, in terms of what to grow and how to do it and all that kind of stuff. So, sorry?
I can't keep plants alive.
Yeah, exactly. So, a lot of people are in the same boat. So, and that can be kind of discouraging if you sort of like, you want to grow some food and you try and it doesn't work out, you can easily be discouraged. So there's a real need for mentoring and guidance and support. And there's, some great resources online. There is, there's a lot of kind of networks and things, but it's you kind of need to know where to look and who to connect with and how to make those, connections. So, there are kind of,
someone could go, like if they're listening now and they go, and I want to look something up, where's something that they could look up?
So there's a great national festival that's happening at the moment called Grow It Local, which could be, someone else that you might want to feature on your podcast. I'm sure they'd be happy to. They're doing a whole kind of spring festival at the moment on exactly this, on people growing food in their own spaces and celebrating and promoting that. Grow It Local. They've got a whole kind of website with a map around the country of of edible gardening patches and people who you can connect with community gardens. There's Community Gardens Australia that's got a directory of community gardens right around the country.
If you did want to, like you said before, if you happen to see that this block of land is near you in your neighbourhood and has been empty for ages and you can see nothing's happening, who would someone go to if they wanted to think about starting a community garden in that plot of land?
Yeah, so a good local group in Melbourne would be 3000 Acres, 3000acres.org. They were set up a few years ago now to facilitate the establishment of community gardens. So they'd certainly be a good sort of like resource, first port of call to go and have a chat about it and what the process might be in terms of identifying who the owner of that land is and asking permission and all those kinds of questions that would need to be thought through. So yeah, if you're talking about collective gardening, community gardening, it does. Yeah, there's more work that's involved because it's you're talking about managing space, managing land. You're talking about questions of insurance and liability and water and access and then how you organise yourself as a group and managing relationships and all those kinds of things. So it's a fantastic thing to do, but yeah, it does require some organisation and coordination and structures around it. So. But there are organisations that are established to support groups to do that. Again, it's local government also have resources. So depending, which council area you're in, they will often have open space managers, and they will be able to kind of tell you who owns the land, and they might have their own kind of community gardens policy around that, and somebody in council that can explain to you what the different steps and processes are that you need to look at in terms of how you get organised and look at accessing that land.
Yeah, brilliant. They're great tips, and I'll put all of those resources on the show notes so that the links are there for people that could follow up if they're interested. So you've done a lot of stuff around food sovereignty and sustainable food systems. Can you explain what this actually means?
Sure. So the food system, simplest way to think about it is everything that happens from from farm to fork, from soil to stomach. How do we actually feed ourselves every day? So it's as simple and as complicated as that, right? So all of us have to eat, so it's absolutely fundamental, to to our health and well-being in our society. We all have to eat, hopefully 3 times a day. Hopefully we can eat well. We are what we eat. Our diets, our food habits, a reflection of our culture, our enjoyment, and ultimately kind of express themselves in terms of our health and well-being. But what we eat as individuals, what we eat as a society, then kind of like flows back down through everything that happens from us as consumers, as eaters, back to through the whole sort of chains and processes of the food system. So we're talking about transport, we're talking about storage, warehousing, logistics, food manufacturing and processing, and then of course back to farms and food growing and how that takes place. So it's this big sort of complex web. I think it's good to think of it as a cycle, as as a network, as interconnected webs of relationships that go together to producing the food that we end up sort of consuming each day. So it has massive impacts, and that's what I was saying to you before in terms of why I've chosen to kind of like focus my work in this area as somebody who's interested in social change and a better and fairer society, and better Australia. It has massive impacts, and one example of that, I don't know, some of your listeners might have heard of the Fight for Planet A series that ABC featured over the last couple of weeks with Craig Rucastle. And the last in that series was on food security. And people can go to ABC iView and have a look at that. He was looking at the challenges facing agriculture and the food system in Australia, and one of the really graphic scenes in that documentary that came out at the end of August, or it was the end of August, was looking at what's happening in Queensland with land clearing and linked to the beef cattle industry of Northern Australia. And it's absolutely, shocking statistics. And I haven't got the exact numbers here right now, but it's hundreds of thousands of hectares being cleared every year, and it works out. I think they were saying it works out to be 2.5 MC, the equivalent area of land of 2.5 mcgs being cleared every, I think it's every hour. I think that might be right. I have to go and check to be quite sure. But, every hour of every day, of every week, of every month, over the last couple of years, of trees being ripped out of the ground. And I went there in 2015. I saw how they do it. You can watch it on the show. They have this massive great chain that's connected to 2 tractors, and they're just ripping out trees. It's brutal and violent. Ripping out trees to then run beef cattle on. Extraordinary impacts in terms of release of carbon, stored carbon in the soil, and contributing to the climate change phenomenon, and destruction of habitat. Massive destruction of habitat for native fauna and insects. So Australia's got the unfortunate distinction of being one of the deforestation hotspots in the world. We're up there with Amazon clearing, and this is why. This is the reason why we are in that classification, and also in terms of biodiversity loss and species loss. So that's, we're talking about, food systems. These are the impacts that the food system is having. Another one is our health and well-being. So talking about, again, the role of state government in this area. The biggest cause of disease and early death in Australia right now is no longer tobacco and alcohol. It's now diet. It's the food that we're eating. And so much of it comes back to consuming too much, fast food and sugar-sweetened beverages. And the reason we're doing that, obviously everybody kind of like, choosing to go and patronize those establishments, but that takes place in environments such as Pakenham, where we work, where, according to Deakin University research that came out earlier this year, it's now what they call a food swamp. And what they mean by that is that that suburb has been saturated by fast food franchises. So that for every healthy food outlet, for every greengrocer or supermarket, there are 9 unhealthy food outlets, 9 fast food outlets.
Wow.
And they tend to cluster around kindergartens, around primary schools, and around secondary schools. So you can go and look at it on Google Earth or Google Maps. You see a kind of like clustering approach, a clustering phenomenon of these industries around these educational settings. And then on top of that, we have a very permissive advertising and marketing framework, and this is federal government now, where there's almost no controls on the ability of these industries to market those products and target children. Primary school children, school children, specifically with marketing, and they spend billions of dollars, and they're very sophisticated. They know what they're doing in promoting these products. And then on top of that, Melbourne, we're obsessed with sports. Australia's sports obsessed culture, and who are the biggest sponsors of AFL, of cricket? McDonald's. If you watch AFL, it's McDonald's all the time. So these are messages that then become kind of embedded in the minds of young kids.
Absolutely.
And it all contributes to this food swamp phenomenon and this pandemic, the other pandemic that we don't talk about so much, which is childhood obesity. The generation of our children, my children, are going to have a reduced life expectancy because of the food that they're eating, which is a shocking reversal of living standards in Australia. And of course, it's much worse for First Nations communities and migrant communities in Australia as well. So these are the big problems of the food system. Sustainable food systems is about saying, recognizing those problems and saying we need to talk about this as a culture and as a society. We need to become engaged. We need to become food literate. We need to educate ourselves about these challenges and problems. And then we need to be engaged and become active. We need to become food citizens, and we need to say to our local government and our state government, look, this is not good enough that you've allowed our built environment and our land to be managed in this way and organised in this way that's producing these terrible outcomes that are, damaging our own health, damaging our children's health, and damaging this country and its ecosystems. We need to do better. We can do better. We know what the answers are. We know there's, thousands of Australian farmers and hundreds of thousands of farmers worldwide who are not embracing, large-scale, destructive industrial agriculture in the way I've described it, but are managing land sustainably, that are not putting, toxic chemicals into soils and waterways, but are, working much more in harmony with nature, educating themselves about the ecology that they're in, and seeing themselves not so much in a relationship of, how can I kind of work this land as hard as I can to make, money out of it in, a 5 or 10 year horizon, but much more from a kind of like an indigenous cosmology, which sees you as a farmer as in a relationship of stewardship or care with that land. And the question is, how can I leave this, this farm, this land in a better condition than what I found it, and leave it as the basis for future food security and for, future abundance and flourishing for future generations of land managers in Australia. I mean, that should be, I think, the priority for agriculture in this country. And, many farmers now are kind of like embracing that kind of paradigm shift, that mindset. And that should then translate across the whole food system. How can we organise our food system so that it optimises human health and well-being at every point, and also optimises flourishing ecosystems and minimises harm?
Yeah.
Those should be the priorities. Those should be the questions. So that's sustainable food systems, and food sovereignty kind of relates to that by
It would,
saying that.
yep.
Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, just before you go on to that, it just seems like when you say all that, it just seems like a no-brainer. I mean, my background is in health promotion, and so obviously that's an interest area of mine, and I've studied, stuff to do with that. So it's, for me, it just seems a no-brainer, and obviously with your interest, it seems like a no-brainer. But I don't understand why for everyone else or for so many why the decisions have been made the other way. And I know the argument is is money, but in the long term, where it's costing the states and the nation more money through illness than it is in the money that they're gaining in revenue through these franchises and and big corporation setups. I don't.
Well, that's right, and yeah, it's absolutely common sense that we should be organising our food system and farming system in a way that is for long-term resilience and health and sustainability. I mean, that's just obvious. How could you argue against that? But I think the reason that change is difficult is because there are vested interests, there are powerful interests that are benefiting from the current situation and don't want to see it changed. The same thing happened with the tobacco, the argument about tobacco. I mean, it was, obvious that tobacco was causing harm and that we should take measures to reduce consumption and free marketing of tobacco. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when it was Benson and Hedges that was sponsoring cricket in Australia. It was the Benson and Hedges World Cup for a long time, until we decided that that was no longer appropriate and we shouldn't be associating sport and something that children participate in en masse with the marketing opportunity for an obviously unhealthy product. So I think, but that wasn't easy. That took time. That took a lot of campaigning by public health, promotion and public health campaigns. So. There's a lot of resistance, I guess, is what I'm saying. There's kind of like entrenched vested interests that are benefiting from the status quo that don't want to see a change because, if farmers know how to manage their land and can restore fertility to soils through compost and through, manure and through natural ecosystems, why would they need to go and spend tens of thousands a year on fertilizers and chemicals? If they can develop that ecological literacy and manage the land in that way, they're not going to need to, be spending their money with those corporations. So it's, this is kind of powerful and liberating. And from an ecological perspective and a human health perspective, it's absolutely the right thing to do. But it's threatening because it threatens, the vested interests of certain economic actors. So it becomes a political question, and that's where I was going to with food sovereignty. So food sovereignty is a social movement, a food movement that has been initiated through when I started talking about Guatemala, the kinds of small scale farmers in countries like Guatemala, many of them women farmers, because the majority of small scale farmers in the world are women, in discussion with each other across culture, across language, across the world, identifying that they share interests in common, which is growing food for their own communities to sustain themselves and to sustain their own ecosystems. And that's what they want to say that the food system should be about, and that food and agriculture should have those as the highest priorities. And so food sovereignty is the idea of a democratic and inclusive and participatory food system nationally and globally that prioritizes ecological integrity and human health and well-being, and that should be the focus of policies and resourcing and research more and over and above the short-term profit interests of the large agribusiness and food retailing and manufacturing corporations that currently are the major decision makers in the global food system. So, that's the idea of food sovereignty. It's like, how can we empower ourselves, educate ourselves, and work together to make these important and necessary changes in our food and farming systems?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And obviously then that, brings it to a more fair system with more equity between, you know, different levels of, I suppose, privilege of different people. You know, it closes the gap between different socioeconomic classes.
Exactly, that's right. Yeah, because I mean, as you said at the start, I mean, my first degree was in law, and my PhD, you know, looked at human rights, and I was a human rights activist. I identify as a human rights activist. I believe in the idea of universal human rights, and the idea of universal human rights is, you know, when it comes to food, is that everybody should be entitled to have good food. Basically, you have the food they need to be healthy. You know, every child on earth should have the food they need to develop their brain and their body and their organs in a healthy and complete way.
Yeah.
And as a species, humanity can do that. Like there's no reason why nearly 1 billion people today are going hungry. You know, why we have tens of millions of children malnourished and stunted. There's no reason for that.
Totally.
That we can, you know, we can achieve that. There's no reason for anyone in Australia to be hungry. Like, it's unacceptable. We're a rich country. We're more than capable of providing enough food, regardless of whoever you are, or, you know, what your life circumstances are, or how much money you've got. We are wealthy enough to distribute our resources equitably so that everybody, you know, can eat well. That's the idea of the human right to food, the universal human right to adequate food, and I would see that as like a, you know, basic foundational principle that should underpin, you know, all of our work on sustainable food systems. And certainly that's from where we come as Sustain. That's a kind of like an ethical commitment and principle that we have that guides our work in this area.
Yeah, brilliant, Nick. You're doing your work's, you know, awesome, and I'd love, you know, I would have loved to have more time in this discussion for you to be able to share more about Sustain and the business. But I'll put a link to the website so people can check out in more detail what you do. But I think we've covered your goals and the main work that you're doing in the conversation so far. But what I'd love to talk now about is your latest project, which is kind of touched on it earlier when you talked about the opportunity and the silver lining that this COVID time has given us, and for people to realise that because of the lockdowns and because of the restrictions that and the time that a lot of people have had, that they've, you know, started growing edible gardens, you know, in their homes, and some of the, also, like you said, the health benefits that people are getting by just spending time in the garden. So you created in your latest project a survey called the Pandemic Gardening Survey. So I'm wondering if you can tell me and tell us all a little bit about what that is and why you put it together, to start there, and then we'll talk about maybe some of the findings.
Sure. So yeah, the reason for this, and this kind of touches on what I was saying before about my own work as a Churchill Fellow and being interested in urban agriculture and its importance, that we have been organising for the last few years a National Urban Agriculture Forum, where we're wanting to celebrate and acknowledge and demonstrate the importance of urban agriculture in Australia. So during the COVID time, working with, you know, affiliated organisations such as Stephanie Alexander Kitchen Garden or Foundation, 3,000 Acres, Community Gardens Australia, Sustainable Gardening Australia, Pocket City Farms, and others, Yarrabingan, we decided to, you know, to try and investigate the how many people were actually growing some of their own food at this time, and what it meant to them to be doing it during COVID and lockdown. And that was kind of like, you know, there were a lot of reports, newspaper reports coming out about, you know, nurseries, Bunnings and so on, selling out of seeds and seedlings, and it seemed a lot of people were taking up sort of food gardening at this time. So we wanted to kind of like capture that and get a bit of a sense of the zeitgeist, I suppose, at this time, as to, you know, what people were doing in their time at home in the garden, and, you know, what it meant to them. So that was the idea of the Pandemic Gardening Survey, which we put out in mid-June and let it go for about a month. And with the support of Costa Georgiadis of Gardening Australia and the Diggers Club and others, we managed to get over 9,000 responses, which was
Wow.
pretty phenomenal response. And yeah, it really kind of like demonstrated, what we'd kind of intuited, but we now got kind of like, facts and figures to kind of back all this up. That people were spending a lot of time in the garden. A lot of people were spending a lot more time in the garden. People were growing a lot of food, and a lot of people were growing a lot more food than normal because they had more time. That gardening mattered a great deal for people, and I can actually give you, I think, there's a particular question that we had about the importance of gardening during the pandemic, like how much gardening meant to you, and we gave people the choice. There were four choices rather. So it was that gardening is extremely important at this time. I couldn't have made it through without my garden. That it was very important. Being able to garden during this time has meant a great deal. That it was somewhat important. I like gardening, but it's not essential, and not so important I could take it or leave it. So over 80% of the 9,000 respondents said that garden was either extremely important, as in almost like a matter of survival. I couldn't have made it through without my garden. It was about 20%, or about 1,600 people said that. And then over 60%, or over 5,300 people, said it was very important to them that being able to garden at this time meant a great deal. So I think I've just got a little quote that I can give you on that. If I can, sorry, I just have to get to the actual presenting mode so I can actually read this properly. Just bear with me for 1 second, Lisa. All right, so so here's somebody who started gardening since the COVID pandemic in Brisbane. She said, during March and April, I lost all of my work. It was a very anxious time, but the physical activity of setting up a few garden beds and resolving the issues of possum, bird and cabbage butterfly gave me a strong focus. And then someone else, a lady in Woy in New South Wales, said, I live in a corner townhouse on my own. I grow as much as I can on my small pot, and mostly things I can cook or preserve. Just being able to walk outside and pick what I need for my meal, my entire meal, or just herbs or additions to supplement the meal, has saved me from being around in markets or supermarkets. I felt safer and healthier. So we had, hundreds of comments like that. And then in terms of like the mental health benefits, the psychological well-being that people derive from being in the garden, we had comments like this, that, or rather the statistics in terms of 38% of respondents, or over 3,300 people, said that gardening has a great impact on mental health. It makes me feel much more relaxed, less stressed and anxious and happier. And then a further just under 3,000 people, 2,975, or 34% of respondents said that gardening had a significant impact on mental health, makes me feel more relaxed, less stressed and anxious and happier. So that's over 70% of respondents saying, gardening has a really significant impact on their mental health and well-being. So here's somebody who identifies as a low-income household, that's less than $50,000 a year, as a household in Melbourne, lady aged between 45 and 54. She's been growing food for over 10 years, and she says, gardening has grounded me and connected me to empowering myself in a particularly disempowering circumstance. It's given me an outlet for my creativity and calmed my mood as I've gotten used to letting go of my pre-COVID life. It's taken place of work hours and actually is more meaningful, this work with my Mother Earth. It's a deeply fulfilling and rewarding experience.
Wow, beautiful. It must give you such joy to be reading through some of these responses. I mean, the impact that such the simple thing that our grandparents did so easily, and people are starting to bring that way back. And I think that that's been one of the beautiful things about this COVID time is, and I wrote a post about it on my personal page actually yesterday or the day before, about how it's sort of this feeling like we're bringing back the grandparents' lifestyle, obviously with the aid of digital technology to be able to advance some of the things or connect in different ways, but back to the modern world. And it's really beautiful, and some of those responses that you just read out are just so heartening.
Absolutely. Look, I'll just share a couple of others with you because I realise we've gone over our hour. We could
That's all right.
this for a long time. Somebody from Tasmania, a lady from Tasmania says, "It has kept me calm and focused on the future." There is a future when you garden.
Yeah, amazing. That's so simple.
And another lady from New South Wales says, "Thank goodness for gardening. It brings me peace, happiness, comfort, generosity, connections, health, and nourishment." There were just thousands of comments like that of people who said how much it meant to them, and the real importance of this. And somebody from South Australia said, in relation to us doing the survey, and this was very validating, he said, "I'm so glad that someone is recording this awakening. I feel that gardening keeps me in touch with the basics of our existence. It reminds me that the complexities of life can sometimes just require observation and interaction. It reminds me that the graciousness of life is abundant. These are qualities learnt in a garden." And I just find those words really, really touching and quite poetic and moving, really. And again, it kind of like, it makes me really want to again, so do what I can, and in the position that we have and the platform that we have now with Sustain, to share those messages that so many thousands of Australians shared with us through this survey, to say to our the people who manage land, the people who have budgets to support this kind of work, that to say, look, this is such a powerful activity and so meaningful to so many Australians. So beneficial, so impactful in so many ways. Why can we not use this opportunity to promote it, to expand it? Because it can just have so many flow-on benefits. Not just now during the pandemic, but for years and decades to come.
Absolutely. So, is there apart from just showing I suppose, compiling the reports of the results, is there specific things that you aim to do to use the results for?
Absolutely. So we've got a webinar. We've got a couple of webinars coming up. We will be sharing. We're just, there's, as you can imagine, been a massive body of work to go through 9,000 completed responses and synthesize it into a presentation form and a report form. But that's what we've been doing over the last couple of months. So we'll be sharing that as a public webinar on the 16th of September.
Great. If you forward me the details of that, I'll put the details of that webinar in the show notes. And is that public?
Yes, that's a public webinar. Yep. So I'll share that with you in the chat now, Lisa. So you've got that. So yes, we'll be doing that, and that will be, kind of like a public webinar for everybody who's interested in this. That will be also featuring Costa Georgiadis of Gardening Australia, who's been a major kind of champion of this work. And then on the 9th of October, we'll be doing a follow-up webinar, which will be really focusing on the recommendations and the, where to next, and the actions and the implications that we see coming out of these findings. So the 16th will be, what did we find and what were the key themes and messages? And the 9th will be, for local government, state government, policymakers, over to you, like what are the, what needs to happen in terms of actually, supporting and resourcing and expanding this this area. So that would be, a webinar on the 9th. Both for people in government, but also people in community who are wanting to do the sorts of things that you said about getting access to land, being able to set up community gardens, what kind of support do they need, all that kind of stuff. So, and then we'll be publishing a report. So after we've done the second webinar, we'll be publishing a report, and we'll be taking that to every council. We'll send that to every council in Australia, all 700 or 650, whatever it is. And we'll also be sending it to every state government and to the federal government, and saying, look, these are the voices of 9,000 Australians from every state and territory who've talked about, just how much it's meant to them to be able to have access to this space at this time, and to be able to, grow some of their own food. And this is a huge opportunity for you as a government to show leadership and support, and help us, come together as a nation, as a community, and make some really positive changes. And it's not, we're not talking about, billion-dollar infrastructure programs. We're talking about supporting people, connecting people in what they're already doing and what they want to do, and just creating the frameworks and some resourcing and some programs around it to really kind of ramp it up. So I think it's a huge opportunity, and we'll be pushing that as hard as we can in all the different places that we have access to.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think it's such a good initiative, and it is, if any silver lining can come out of this time that's been so difficult for people, for progress to happen in this area, out of a situation like this, and obviously out of yours and your team's initiation to get this survey rolling, and then be able to do something with it, then wow, that's a massive silver lining, isn't it?
Absolutely. And this is all kind of like leading up to our third National Urban Agriculture Forum, and I'll share the link with you now, the uaf.org.au website. And for the first time, we're going to be having a nationwide acknowledgement and celebration of all forms of urban agriculture across Australia in a Urban Agriculture Month. So on our website, we'll be having a calendar and listing of events, and anybody can jump on there and organise an activity, an event, a tour of their garden, a workshop, a podcast, a film showing, a lunch, whatever it might be that's kind of themed around sustainable food systems and edible gardening. And we really want to make that a really big, focused national series of events. Try and get 100, 500, 1,000 different activities happening around Australia, to really shine a spotlight on this area and send that message strongly that this is something that people really embrace and love and want acknowledged and to be supported in. So that's what we're doing in April next year.
Oh, brilliant. I mean, very inspiring, all the work that you do, and it really is, such an important area of social change, because like you said, it all really stems down to, life is what we eat, and how important it is, and the ripple effects that it has on so many areas of our total well-being, and in so many different groups, actually everybody. So and our environment. So fantastic. Thank you so much. Thanks. So it's been so insightful and so inspirational chatting with you today. So, I think in winding it up, is there anything further that you want to add?
No, thanks, Lisa. It's been really great to chat with you as well, and thanks very much for the opportunity. And I really hope it's been of interest to your listeners, and hopefully it's got some of them inspired to, continue what they're doing, or new ideas about how they can, get involved. I'd just like to, really encourage people to, to think about the foods that you eat, to think about, the implications of that, to think about the broader connections. To realise that you can make changes, that we're all agents of change in our own lives and through our own kind of networks. This is the time of connection and networks. We're all powerful beings, more powerful than we know, and I think it is the time to inhabit that power, and to realise that all of us who are around today and are conscious of the the big crises and challenges that we're facing have a responsibility to be active and to act and to do what we can within our capacities and relationships to be agents of change. And yeah, just finally, if you feel moved at all or by what I've said and the work that we're doing, please support us by coming along to that webinar on the 16th. And also, we're a membership-based organisation. Our voice and our work can become stronger if people join as a member of Sustain. So I'll just leave that link for you as well if people do want to get involved. We have.
Share that link now. I mean, I'll put it on the show notes as well, but do you want to just say what the website link is?
Yeah, sustain.org.au, and there's a section there about getting involved and becoming a member. And yeah, we have categories of membership. If you become a member, you have free access to all our webinars, as well as other benefits. And we have a category of membership. It's what we call Solidarity membership. And that means that 10% of those memberships go towards the Pay the Rent initiative, which is giving back to our First Nations peoples in Australia and making a direct financial contribution to the work they're doing in terms of reclaiming their sovereignty and their culture and their future. So that's we'd really encourage people to consider that and would welcome people becoming involved as members of Sustain.
Absolutely. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much. I'll definitely put all the links on the show notes from different parts of the conversation, as well as obviously the Sustain website, as well as the link for the upcoming webinar. So thank you again. And if you love today's conversation, please share it with your friends and subscribe to the Wealthy Living Conversations on iTunes and on YouTube, so that you can listen to more conversations from incredible humans that are doing fantastic things in this world. If you, both Nick and I would love to hear what your biggest insight or takeaway is from today's conversation. So please leave a comment and let us know. To find out a little bit more about my services, you can visit my website at wealthyliving, living.com.au, or connect with me on any of my social media platforms. Until next time, remember, connection is medicine.